The
Yeah.
government mishandles diseases all the time. One that they've mishandled is CWD, chronic wasting disease. I remember, Steve, welcome to the show, by the
Thank
way.
you.
College 20 some years ago, going to a lecture on CWD, and this is in Wisconsin. I went to University of Wisconsin River Falls, big ag school, and they were talking about the problems with CWD. I remember the sniper squads that go and shoot these deer down by Madison because they got to stop the spread. They have mismanaged this thing to a point where now it seems like the big threat in terms of CWD is all deer farmers. I see this as a hunter. Like, you guys get the bad reputation. And you're unique in this whole case because you spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement. You're the, was it the Kitson County Sheriff?
Yes.
So you were a sheriff's deputy. You know law enforcement. You know the law. And all of a sudden the DNR's got some new powers granted to him by the current legislature and the governor of Minnesota to go onto your farm. Tell us what is going on with you in the DNR.
Sure. So let me give you just a little history here. I started my farm. It's 31 years old today. And a few years ago, about 5 years ago, the assault started. It was Lou Cornicelli bad-mouthing us on social media. Deer farms are the smoking gun. We're causing it. They painted us to be a villain. CWD is a disease that they want to use to blame to get rid of an industry. We had 700 happy, prospering farms. We're down to maybe 125, 100 farms right now with the social media blitz to assault us and paint us as a villain. So a couple years ago, they made a law that said a licensed officer could go on to my farm if he had reasonable suspicion that a game law was being violated. Well, that and 50 cents won't buy you a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get you onto a farm. But the Minnesota legislature stuck it in there and said if they have reasonable suspicion, they can bypass the warrant, piggyback on the back of the Board of Animal Health, and go on to family farms. I wrote letters to the Keith Ellison's office. I wrote letter to attorneys, the commissioner, Sarah Stroman, and they didn't like what I did, so they firmed it up, and they said, well, we'll just pass it into actual law. They don't even need reasonable suspicion. We'll turn you over to the DNR, and we'll send licensed officers with powers of arrest. That's the key, onto private property. Now, people will say, well, you're subject to inspection. You have a license, so you got to be inspected. I agree. I can be inspected, and I have to submit to an inspection, but not to licensed officers. Does you understand the difference?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a Fifth Amendment. I think it's Fifth. Is there another one? I guess Fourth Amendment, too, search and seizures. So,
these officers have firearms and body cameras, everything that a normal police officer
so they
would.
have powers of arrest. And so me working in law enforcement almost 30 years, if you have powers of arrest, people don't understand. That officer is bound to the rules of criminal procedure. Mm-hmm. And you were trained on those rules. And that means that if somebody says, hey, I don't want to talk to you, they don't have to. And if they say, hey, I want an attorney present, you got to stop. Hey, you can't come on my property. I didn't give you consent. You need to get a search warrant. The rules of criminal procedure, each officer is bound to those rules, and now they're going to come onto our farms. So I've been on letters, and I've been doing meetings and talking to people, and no, we're going to send game wardens. So the date comes for me to have a game warden on my property on about May 9th. We had a talk at the end of my driveway, and I said, I have a problem with you coming on my property in the curtilage of my yard. You understand the castle doctrine, mm-hmm. right? Once we're on private property, you can't just barge on there. They say, but it's state law. They passed a law. It's contrary to the Constitution. It's not valid. Mm-hmm. The Constitution also says that no state can compel any of its citizens to testify against themselves. So if you tell me you're going to lose your license to farm if you don't talk to a law enforcement officer, you're compelling me to talk.
Right.
And then they want to film everything. So on May 9th, I told them, hey, can you get me an attorney general opinion? I think that's reasonable. I, as a law enforcement officer, had spoke to the attorney general's office many times, mm-hmm. and I got good information. And they said, yes, we will talk to the attorney general's office. We'll get you a legal opinion. Well, that didn't happen. So then I rescheduled my inspection again. I have till the first of the year. I got a notice of violation for asking if they could get me a legal opinion to verify that my state law enforcement agency is not violating the Constitution. So here we are. It's on my farm on August 15th. I had my senator there, Senator Nathan Wiesenberg, and I had State Rep John Burkle. They agree that this is unconstitutional, but the Democrats don't care about the Constitution. Now, people will tell me, Steve, you're making it political. I can look and see when they vote against to run my farm out of business, all these hostile laws, It's 100% Democrats voting to destroy the family farm. It's 100% Republicans voting to save it. It is political. It's a political disease.
Well, it's a stance you got to take, because I think about this, and it's like, okay, so you're a deer farmer. I mean, how many of you guys interact with deer farmers ever? The only reason deer farmers even come across my head is just because you guys have been villainized in the CWD fight,
Sure.
right? And I like deer.
Right.
But it's like, if they can do this to you,
Correct.
and get away with it, they're going to do it to all of us.
Right.
They could come up with any bullshit reason why you need to open up your doors to law enforcement officers. And that's something that we cannot let happen in America. That's so clearly a violation of the Constitution.
It's clearly, but I've had some people in authority be a little confused on this issue. And they'll say, Steve, it's a licensed operation in the state of Minnesota. So once it's licensed, you're subject to inspection. I agree. They could send out a biologist to my farm, the DNR. They can't send a licensed officer.
So why do they do that? Why a warden? What is a warden going to know about this operation?
They want to steer us into the ground. It's not about a disease. They want to get us with infractions and shut us down. We've went from 700 farms down to less than 125.
But why a warden? Like, why do they need a warden to do that?
They need somebody who would be a little more aggressive and confident, who can stomp
So you
us
think
into
this
the
is a
ground.
complete hit job on you?
This
That's why
it's a total hit job. But let me explain the licensing ability. People say, well, a truck going down the road is subject to a DOT inspection. And so, Steve, you're subject to an inspection. But the DOT officers are inspecting them on a public road. This is my home. So you were tying it together and saying, well, if this doesn't stop here, where does it end up? Here's my question for you. Walz was pushing and foaming at the mouth for gun registration. The laws said, we will treat firearms like an automobile. You will have to have insurance on the gun. You will have to license the gun and register. And if you get caught with a gun that doesn't have it's not registered, we're going to create a whole new division. Those laws kind of fell by the wayside last time around. But if they created guns to be licensed, then what the wardens are saying is, and some of these people that are having this argument, once it's a licensed activity, does that mean that you've forfeited your constitutional rights and wardens can now come on your property and film everything and talk to you and you don't have the right to remain silent? You asked, where does it stop? I'm telling you where it's going. That's where it's going.
100% is where it's going. And then the other thing here is they're filming. So what if they find something else on your property? Right?
What if they find
or
something
suspicion
else?
Of something.
And so here's the thing. I don't have anything to hide.
Mm-hmm.
I could let people film my property. And people say, what's the big deal? Just do the inspection. But that's not the point. The point is, I have forefathers that died and bled out on a battlefield for my constitutional rights. Their death wasn't in vain. I owe it to myself and my sons and my family to fight for my farm and our Constitution. I owe it, and I'm going to fight for our Constitution. And all I have to fight with is what? Social media. Today I'm on your show. I have my farm Facebook page, and I have my right to free speech, and that's all I have to fight
for now.
with.
You got it for now, right?
Right. I have my right to free speech.
Apparently,
for now.
if you question the election results, you can be federally prosecuted for that if you're Donald Trump, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yep.
how about infringement on that First Amendment?
Right. Yep.
Or the fact that Facebook's encouraged to take down groups like us off the internet because the Biden administration says so. There's an infringement on your First Amendment. See, I think, whether it's First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, we have got to stand up and just put this wall right in front of anyone trying to abuse those constitutional rights.
Amen.
Yours is just not as sexy as some of these other ones. The First Amendment ones. Those ones are, a lot of people are attracted to that. Deer farmer from northwestern Minnesota, whatever it is. It's like, if they can do this to you, they're going to come up with whatever bullshit they can think of. I was going to say daycare, licensed daycare, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
They're going to come up with these excuses.
We don't send law enforcement officers into daycare. They are inspected, but it's not by licensed officers.
Exactly. It's a huge issue.
We have restaurants that need licenses. They have a health or food inspector, but they don't have a licensed officer going in there. If I was an officer and I wanted to go into a restaurant, I can't say, I'm here to inspect you and let me search your cook's bag back there for methamphetamine.
Right.
No, get a search warrant and go into the restaurant when you're looking for criminal behavior.
Right.
But let me back this whole thing up a little bit and see where we came from.
Well, you do that.
Do you remember, you won't, there was a Colonel Wilhelm from the DNR. The DNR got spanked hard because they were barging into fish houses. And they just barged in. They said, we can do it.
Are you
And
serious?
yes, and the Supreme Court said, you're going to stop. So Wilhelm, the colonel at the time.
When was this?
This was like 20 years ago.
No kidding.
And they were barging into fish houses. Well, you could go out with your wife and have a romantic evening and light some candles in the fish house.
Do you do that? Is that what you do?
And
Steve?
they would barge.
Is that your marriage advice? William just got married in July. Is that?
I don't fish. I don't have time for it.
You don't have time. Wait, come on. Don't you have well, I guess does a deer farmer have an off season?
No,
probably not.
No, I don't. So let me just.
But that's good advice there, young William, for you and your wife. You can go light the candles.
Now I'm allowed to go out in an ice house without being interrupted.
Yeah.
So the point of the matter is, they were barging in, and Wilhelm said, "The law has changed. We need to stop how we do business and figure out a new way to get into fish houses." The law didn't change. It was the Constitution. The DNR got caught violating the Constitution, and then they said, well, it changed. The Constitution didn't change. It's been the same.
Right.
And so now all of a sudden, they're barging on to my deer farm, and it's going to keep on going. It's going to spread. We're going to set a precedent in Minnesota one way or another. It's going to be a good precedent or a bad precedent, but it doesn't end with the deer farm that nobody cares about. It's going to end up on other family farms.
100%. Yeah, other farms and other industries. Let's go to the audience here.
Yeah, we have some people. Nathan Wiesenberg is actually here, and he says Merca.
America? Is that what he wrote?
Or America, yeah.
What's his...
He's on Facebook. He always watches on Facebook.
He watches on Facebook?
He needs to watch on
we need to get him
Rumble.
on Rumble.
Oh, he's not based.
No. But let's see. So Glenn Kahn says, I know a farmer that put down a wood plank with nails in it to send a message to the DNR trespassing on his property. DNR got a flat tire.
Sure.
Well, now I pay for that as a taxpayer.
And then, let's see. There's a lot of talk about the previous topic. Bad Hat Harry says this is more insidious than just the DNR and game farms. Base Minnesota says, unfortunately, you'll never really own your own property. Try not paying your property taxes, and you'll find out who really owns it. Mm-hmm. And then Bad Hat Harry says, well, there's that and eminent domain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's crazy to me about this is that this is all being pushed by Rick Hansen, right?
Correct. Correct.
Metro Democrat who represents like the outer St. Paul area. Mm-hmm. Are there any deer farms in his district? I have no idea. Probably not.
But you got to understand something about State Representative Rick Hansen. He tried to push a bill forward to allocate $250,000 to the Board of Animal Health and the DNR. I think it was $250,000, and I have him on video. And he says, if COVID-19 mutates to deer and back to humans, it's going to wipe out a ton of people. So we need to authorize the DNR right now to kill all the deer on deer farms. It's not about disease.
He said that?
He said that, and Lueck stood up on the Zoom meeting, and Lueck said, Representative Lueck said, Republican, this is a circus. I can't be a part of it. I'm going to leave. He said, do you want us to euthanize dogs and cats in case they give COVID back? Should we start testing dogs and cats for COVID? And if they get it, we'll start killing them in mass amounts. So Rick Hansen says no. He only wanted to kill the deer farm deer. Rick Hansen hates deer farm deer. He pushes and pushes and pushes, and now he got a state representative to bring his bill forward. And he just kind of hoodwinked her and said, bring the bill forward, and then it passes. But when they passed a bill on agriculture, they went around the agricultural committee, and they got it to pass, and it didn't even get a hearing in the ag committee. My deer are livestock under Minnesota statute. We're ag. So I'm just saying there's so much corruption. It runs so deep, and it's not about disease, you guys. Think of this. All the attacking on CWD and testing, they're making hunters so afraid. Young couples are going to say, you know what? CWD, I don't understand it, but it's so bad. I think we shouldn't hunt this year. We don't need the meat. Mm-hmm. We're driving people away from the sport of hunting by fear-mongering and an overzealous DNR.
Well, I got a love-hate relationship with that theory because, we'll lose our rights as hunters if there's not many hunters out there. I also like having the woods to myself. So it's not the worst thing in the world for me. Like, for instance, 2 years in a row, or not in a row, but 2 years, I did not draw the first round of Montana elk tag. I'm like, where did all these Western hunters come from? Like, all of a sudden, that's the problem to draw these tags. So, but no, I agree. There's just, I don't know what the grand conspiracy is on CWD, COVID, CWD, right? It's all the same thing in my book there. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. There was an article, and I want to say it was the Iowa deer herd, but maybe it was Minnesota, where like they tested deer and 84% were testing positive for COVID.
I think there are Michigan and different places where they did tests on deer and COVID, and who cares? I don't care.
Right, who cares?
I don't care.
Right.
You know what I mean? COVID doesn't matter. But if you attach money and you say, we're going to fearmonger about an issue, here's money to solve it. If you identify a problem and attach money, they're going to make it bigger because they need more money in these agencies. They're money hungry.
Why does Rick Hansen and a lot of these Democrat politicians, why do they hate deer farms so much? Is it because it's a wild game species?
I think we've got Bob Meyer at the top of the assistant commissioner working closely with Rick Hansen, and I think there's a hatred for deer farms. We do have hunts, and so
that's it. Is the
I
hunt
think
component?
I just don't think they like that we're having hunts in Minnesota, and they can't stand what we're doing, and so now it's been a full court press attacking us.
Is it the ethics of hunting inside a fence, or they just hate hunting in general, and this is the one little thing
I think
they
it's
carve out?
hunting. I think it's hunting in general. No. In my property,
Because they think of it as unsportsmanlike.
I have 2 miles of fence put up. They can't stand it. They're mad at it, and they want to regulate us to death.
I think people need to understand, why do you raise deer? Because we can't sell venison here in the United States, obviously.
Right. So I have a doe urine company. It's a family farm. My boy.
Explain to people what that means, because people are like, well, what, urine?
Yeah,
You're
so
farming
we-
for
we-
urine?
We put does in a headlock and we tickle them until they. No, we don't. But we what we actually do is we have a collection facility. The does run in there. I can run in 30 does at a time, and I can collect their doe urine, and we bottle it and we freeze it and we sell it to hunters across the state. It was kind of a little thing for my kids to do to buy their first car. We'd sell 8 ounces for $25. My kids thought it was great. And so we were selling doe urine. Well, it grew and it grew and it grew, and the frozen doe urine's working better than anything.
Okay,
it's not
but
sitting
once
on the shelf.
again, Steve,
Why?
why are people buying doe urine? Because a lot of people probably don't understand this.
They're using it as an attraction
you
to
go.
be able to see and harvest big bucks.
Okay, so this
I
is
knew
just so you
that.
understand, us hunters, we buy this expensive urine, $25.
Yep.
They make them in gel formats too nowadays, and then you dab it on a little cotton thing, and you put it and you hang it in a tree, and you hope a buck smells that. I always think the funny theory of that is if it smells that, it also probably smells you as a hunter. So you got to play the wind. But you stick that in a tree so a buck during the rut smells it and comes into your tree. And I've seen this, obviously.
Sure.
You put these up and a buck will literally come right to it. Their
Right.
nose
And
don't lie.
and so what do we do on our farm? We sell doe urine. We sell breed stock.
Did you make
across-
when Wiesenberg was out at your farm? Did you make him collect urine
we
samples?
we
from
don't
some
collect in the summer. We only collect in the fall.
Only
So
in the fall.
He would have been.
And Doe and estrus,
he would
that's right.
he would have dug into it though. He's a good guy.
He has a question as well. When
Yep.
you're,
Is it
when
on
you guys are
doe
ready.
urine?
No.
Go ahead.
Well, he just said, ask Steve about MDHA newest leader. Is that Minnesota? What is that?
Right.
MDHA.
So Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, a few years ago had a guy on there. Craig Engwall was their executive director, but Craig was the attorney for the Minnesota DNR for many, many years. So Craig was on there pushing and pushing this deer hunting club to attack us, and we finally pressured Craig off the job through social media. We exposed a bunch of corruption he's doing, and they were going to hire a new guy. So we were excited. They hired a brand new guy named Jared. We thought, okay, now we'll have a chance to not have the #1 deer hunting group pushing to run us out of business. Jared gets hired, and he's the executive director, a young guy, of the Minnesota Deer Hunter Association. They hire a lobbyist right down to the Capitol to work with who? Rick Hansen, Bob Meyer, to run us out of business. And so, it's based on lies, fear-mongering over disease. And here we've got the #1 deer hunting group in the state, the Minnesota Deer Hunter Association. Their executive director, nobody's ever seen a picture of him with a deer. We've challenged them. Can you show us a picture of you with a deer, Jared? Anybody listening, if you got a picture of Jared the Mrazek from Minnesota Deer Hunter Association holding up a deer, I'd be shocked. I'll give you a $200 cash reward if you can show me a picture of Jared. It doesn't exist. We've got a guy at the top of that agency who doesn't hunt, and he's an environmentalist.
Yeah.
It's been hijacked once again.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Brad
Ganser, I
yeah.
like that comment. Go ahead, read it.
Well, I don't know
not
which
the
one
one
you're
on
going
me.
to read. I was
Screw
going to
him
read
on
it.
that
He
one.
said the left hates anything that has to do with guns and freedom and things they don't understand.
Kind of makes sense, right?
So
That is-
a president at MDHA just told me, he said that he reached out to the top of MDHA. They were going to donate a gun. A local chapter of Minnesota Deer Hunter Association was going to donate a gun to another club. And they make all their money at gun raffles at their fundraisers, right?
Yep.
And you know what the response back from the top of MDHA was?
What's that?
We're not a a pro-gun organization. We're not promoting guns here.
Well, how are they killing the deer?
Yeah, how
I
are you
mean,
hunting?
Ridiculous.
That was the comment
not a
that
bow
came
hunters
back. So
association.
MDHA put a squash on a chapter donating a gun. That's not our role. Well, then what is your role at the #1 Deer Hunter Associate? What is it? You don't support gun rights?
Well, our audience, Basement Soda, says Steve knows a lot about piss, so we want to stay on the topic of urine here for a second. I'm just
Sure,
kidding.
sure. I could talk about it for 2 hours.
Could you really? What
Yeah.
else is there?
Wow.
Looks like Tucker, pheromones in the urine attract bucks. I didn't know he was a scientist.
He probably hunts.
Tucker's the science.
So
Agent
probably is a
Orange
hunter.
says DNR equals Democrat Nazi revival.
So
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So true.
So the video I did at the end of my driveway in my yard with Nathan and John Burkle, the state rep there, I don't know if we got like 250, 300,000 views. People are concerned. This isn't just a deer farm issue. This is a Constitution issue.
Right.
And if people don't wake up and say, hey, I need to get involved and I need to figure out where we can fight this and what we can do, wake up. Our rights are being stolen from us and we don't even know it. People are just ignorant. I'm sorry, that's the right word. Ignorant is uninformed about the rights that we have. And people just don't know it.
Right. Steve, I got a very, very, very important question for you.
Yep.
What do deer eat?
Yeah, what do
knew it was
deer
coming.
eat? So prior to this, you guys were in the other room talking, and he says, well, what are we going to talk about? And I was so paranoid because I've been interviewed for the last 25 years in front of my live deer. And I said, I get some reporters that don't have a clue what to ask, and we have good stuff to talk about. And they say, what do the deer eat? And he goes, that's what I'm asking you. So,
This is a political show. What are you doing? You are spinning right
Yep.
now. That's spin.
Yep.
You're dodging the question. Answer the question. What do deer eat?
well, the deer eat. I feed my deer, honestly, alfalfa,
There we go.
corn,
We're getting to the bottom of
sunflowers,
this.
peas. I feed them really
Peas,
well.
wow.
Yeah. And when they're in the trailer,
See, we're
I-
back to pee again already.
Peas,
It's
field
unbelievable.
peas,
Just
yeah.
full
I have a
circle.
real journalistic question for
Sure.
you.
Okay, go ahead.
So, you had John Burkle, the state rep there.
Yes.
You had Wiesenberg there, who's a wildlife biologist by trade, but
Allegedly.
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 But the senator for your district is Mark Johnson. I'm curious, where was Mark Johnson
Yeah,
in all this?
so Mark has worked with us. He's been helpful, and I called him, and I think he would have been there, but he was actually on a scheduled event trip somewhere with his family, and it's like it had been planned for a long time, and so we just got it put together, and we had 2 good guys on our farm.
Gotcha. So you have been working with him on this.
Mark has been good, and we've reached out to Mark, and he proposed legislation. But here's the funny thing, you guys. So the DNR does 3 movement bans where we can't sell our product. So that would be like telling a grain farmer, you can harvest your corn, but you can't do it in the fall. You got to harvest your corn, next May. They wouldn't like that. Our product, our deer that we sell, our genetics, we have to move them when it's the right time of year. The DNR did 3 movement bans, shut me down. I had contracts to go to Little Rock, Arkansas with my live bucks on a display. Nope. Bob Meyer says you can't travel for 30 days, 16 months or something. They just shut us down. And that again was a total violation. It was a total lie what they did. I actually got a ticket for bringing my deer to the Minneapolis Sports Show in violation of a 30-day ban. So Mark Johnson put a bill together. He said all these deer farmers have been damaged. They lost out on sales, and we'll give them like $10,000 if they can prove they had $10,000 worth of damage. And Senator Nick Friends was in the room, Democrat, and he said, I'll sign on to this bill. They've been damaged. We're going to do this. And as soon as it's done, the bill dies. And then the next year they got a vote to kill all our farms, and all the Democrats step up and say, oh, yeah, by the way, we're still going to kill your farms. And they passed laws. What laws did they pass now? They've got a law that says I can only pass my farm on to my son 1 time. It
Oh,
has
they're
to be
doing a generational kill. Huh?
Yeah, a generational kill.
Interesting.
Jeez.
So again, people need to wake up because
So they really are trying to end
we're
these things that way.
no, we're dying. We're
Yeah.
on the way out the door. And so can you imagine a 31-year-old pig farm, cattle farm, whatever you raise, and Rick Hansen in the cities gets to dream up a bill and says, Steve, you can stay in farming, you just can't make any money, and we're going to increase your costs. And people say, well, we're just trying to fight disease. We're just going to fight disease. No, you're killing us. You're killing us. I'm concerned about disease too, and we are solving the disease. I could tell you about that. We're solving the disease of CWD that would take a little bit of time.
Well, no, I want to bring that up, but we'll eat bugs and we'll own no property. We'll be happy, right? It's
Right.
like the big plan.
Right.
But you did mention that. I think this will leave off. You have somewhat eradicated CWD on your farm through genetic selection, right?
Sure. So good question.
Oh, by the way, for people that don't know, CWD, chronic wasting disease, basically is like mad cow disease, basically in herd animals or deer herds.
So recent studies have shown that CWD is indistinguishable from scrapie in sheep, and you can't tell the difference under the microscope. And they believe that CWD was actually scrapie that was misnamed, and once it got a new disease, then there was millions of dollars coming at it.
Oh yeah. I can
Okay,
believe
so
that.
now all of a sudden we got a new disease, but with scrapie we got
But
rid of it.
basically attacks the brain cells, and it's a slow deterioration of a white-tailed deer to a point where it just eats the brain and then
Right.
they die. But it's never jumped from deer to humans, right?
Well, all the research says no.
All the research says no. Plus, there's an advisement by the DNRs, certainly in Wisconsin, not to eat the brains and the spinal column. It's been very tempting all these years, but I've somehow managed to not eat those items of a deer. I've eaten certainly deer in CWD areas without any question, and I have
Right.
very few ticks, right?
So there's a farm in Wisconsin. I think it's a Greg Fleece farm. 60% of his bucks harvested in his preserve, 300 acres. 60% annually had CWD. It's in the wild. It surrounds. It's thick in Wisconsin. And the state said you can't sell live deer if you're property, but if they're coming out of there in the back of a truck, gutted or dead, we'll let you harvest them. So 60%, 60%, 60%. It was a bad deal.
Mm-hmm.
It was static. It just stayed at that number. He switched over his genetic markers that they've found working with world-renowned CWD researchers, and they've identified an SS marker at like the 95th or 96th codon. Most wild deer a GG marker. He switched it over to SS through selective breeding over a few years. Last year he had 52 bucks harvested in his preserve. They all drank out of the same waters, same feeders. They socially grew them. 0 had CWD last year. We're solving this. We're being run out of business because of money. We're solving the disease, and we're under attack, and they say we're the villain. We're not the villain.
Yeah, and by the way, I think what people have to understand is the association with deer farms and then the wild deer population is deer are social animals. So they say they go up to the fence, the domestic ones, and then they rub noses or saliva with the wild deer, and that's how it supposedly passes.
Well, that's what they're saying, but again,
That's what they're saying.
that's a lie on its face, because here's why. The canary in the coal mine was the first thing to ever die. The canary was the indicator that, hey, there's not enough oxygen down here, and the canary dies. But we never did blame the canary, did we? But what they've done here is they said, we're going to test 100% of the farm deer for 20 years. And we'll test very few ever in the wild. And if it shows up on a deer farm, then we'll surround the deer farm and test 100% in the wild until we find it in the wild, and then we get to blame the deer farm. But where did it show up first? Well, it showed up maybe on a deer farm, but that's not where it originated. And the biggest threat in moving CWD around the country, do you know what it is? It's hay. You're baling up your hayfield. A deer died out there from CWD. You bale up a bone. You were joking before we started about you seen a deer eat a bird and a bone and chew on this and that. When you bale up a hayfield and a deer died from CWD and there's 15 rib bones out there and they get stuck in a hay bale and then they go on a semi and fly 800 miles to a new area, and a deer picks up the rib bone and starts chewing on it, you're spreading CWD. But they'll never do a hay movement ban.
Yeah, I never thought of that. That's a good point.
They'll never do a hay movement ban, but they'll shut me down and steal my business when I have a USDA program, and it says I have a clean herd. I've tested all my animals for the last 20 years. I don't have CWD. We don't care. We're going to shut you down and steal your farm from you, and I have a closed border. This is a huge constitutional violation, and it's an attack on deer farms. Well, it's just deer farms, but they're coming after other forms of agriculture with these same techniques. That's a fact.
Yeah, interesting stuff. How do people stay tuned to your story, find out more as this thing progresses?
Yeah, so Steve Porter's Trophy Whitetail on Facebook, and I just, I've had a few people say, how do we donate? You're going to end up in court at some point. I got a GoFundMe that we put on there. It's just kind of sitting there a little bit percolating. We got 44,000 patriots on our following our Facebook site. Most people know where it is, Steve Porter's Trophy Whitetail on Facebook. And again, I've been doing this for 31 years. Anybody down in the Twin Cities that ever's been to a major sports show, they've seen my live bucks on display. We've done that for so long. Our name is well known.
Do we have that picture of the deer on the farm? Did you send it to Dawson?
He's got it.
You got it, Dawson?
I gotta pull it up.
These are that's on a night trail cam. How come these are night shots of the deer?
Well, they're in our preserve, but they're not just out waltzing around in front of the cameras in the middle of the day. They're deer, and we've had people come and hunt on my farm in the worst, best, whatever scenario. I had a person come after a certain buck. They hunted 17 days
Really?
before they were able to finally get the buck. So,
Only 60 hours.
yeah.
60 hours? Okay.
It looks like I don't have it. It's not in my spam
They,
folder.
and they
either.
can go right directly to my farm Facebook site.
Okay.
And we got pictures of bucks that we've been putting on there steady. Our hunting season for us on our farm starts September 2nd.
What does a hunt cost?
It can be anywhere from $4,000 will get you a good buck, $5,000, and it can
Do
go
you
up from
do
there.
you predetermine the bucks?
No, we don't, but we sit with people, and if they see a deer, they might say, well, that's
Wait a second. Your job is you sell these hunts and you get to sit with them?
you get to sit with them and film them and watch
Wrong
them.
profession.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah. It's a lot. It is a fun deal. This is the American dream. I built a farm. It took
Yeah.
me 31 years. I love
That's the
my
Texas
farm.
style, by the way. That's like
Yeah.
kind of foreign concept to a lot of us in Minnesota, but that's
Yeah.
how they do in Texas. You
Yeah.
basically hunt ranches. That's all it is. It's
Yeah,
mostly private property.
Let me share one more thing. My son built a home on my farm, 200 yards from my house. He said, Dad, you've run it for 31 years. I'm going to run it for the next 40. I built this farm for my son to take over. He ran from the politics, terrified of what's going on. He ran from it. So when you go over to Carleton County, there's all sorts of land. They have a tax forfeited land division. And when family farmers go belly up and nobody else can
Right.
make money on a family farm because of over-regulation in Minnesota,
Right.
nobody's standing in line to buy these acreage.
Right.
So it goes into the tax forfeited division.
New
And then
WMA.
it just sits there, and people say, well, why doesn't it sell right away? The wolves have eaten all the deer off the land. There's no way to make money on that 40-acre piece, so nobody's buying it. So then the state says, well, we'll just gobble it up and make it state land. And you get to pay more taxes.
Yeah, I get to pay more taxes. I mean, it's nice to have WMAs to hunt on, but those become
But
shit
how many
shows.
acres do we need?
It's a valid question. You
Yeah.
know, it is a valid question.
I'm
I
ju-
like big state forest or federal forest, a place to get lost in, but it is a little ridiculous when you see these farmland areas.
These farmland are never going back to be farmed,
Right.
and the people are getting kicked off the land.
It's a slow acquisition by the state.
It's a slow
More
acquisition.
land.
And if I was to quiz you and you look this up later, you tell me how many acres in Minnesota are controlled by the state, federal, or county governments that are off the tax roll.
Well, I would say so. The state with the highest state-owned land or government-owned land is Alaska. It's like 94%.
How about Minnesota?
Minnesota, and I know Nevada's like 80-some%. I'm guessing Minnesota is probably, I would guess, somewhere in the 20 to 40% range.
I think it's close to 40.
Okay.
So my point is, you said you like big forests with wolves running around and no deer. I think that's what you said. I just quoted you.
You did not quote me there. I do like wolves running around, but I love lots of deer.
So there's
But
not
that's
lots
hard.
of,
It's
but there's
hard to
not
keep
lots of
those,
deer.
right.
My point is, I like to see people own land, and I like to see people go into their local restaurant in a small community and
Right.
buy food. I like to see them pay taxes and support their local school district where there's a whopping 200 kids in the community.
Yep.
I like to see them buy batteries and fertilizer
that's dying.
and
It's dying
support
up
their
north.
local economy.
Right.
And we're killing it at what? The hands of, I'm going to say, Democrats and overregulation and a hostile, aggressive Minnesota DNR.
Right.
That's what I believe to be true.
No, it's 100% dying. What I'm just saying, me personally, I like going up to big lots of woods because I just like I like the frontier days. That's the cool
Sure.
thing. That's the only place you can do it because I also like private property. I grew up hunting, 100-acre, beautiful deer hunting properties in La Crosse, Wisconsin, growing up, or the La Crosse County, that is. And but there just comes a limit to 100 acres ain't bad, but it comes a limit to how much you can hike in a day when you're only on 100 acres. So I like to go really out there. But you're making a great point. We got a cabin north of Bemidji. You go up those small towns, it's dying. It's dying. So southern Minnesota not so much, because that land is ag land, right? But up north, it's just a dying breed. The small towns are just all the old downtowns and small town.
But tell me
Minnesota's
why they're
just
dying. Why are they dying?
Well, it's that very reason. Everybody that wants to do something comes down to the city. It's all this migration because you got to wonder. Minnesota's population isn't booming, right?
Yep.
So why are all these neighborhoods going up in places like Lake Elmo, right? It's because it's this flood to the cities by the younger generations. No one wants the farms. No one wants to do the
But
farming.
why
that
don't they
they're-
want to farm?
Well, there's so many reasons for that.
But
It
it's
could be.
over-regulation.
I think that's a big component of it.
Over-regulation.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's over-regulation. We've got law enforcement officers coming onto a family deer farm, recording everything. I've had women in tears call me up and say, my farm was just inspected by the game wardens. I told them I don't want licensed officers on my property. And they're like, he came into my house, sat down at my kitchen table with his body camera running and said, I'm here to do an inspection. Totally violating our rights. People are walking away from Minnesota. My advice, I'm sorry, but if you're a young person and you want to start a business, for the love of God, don't do it in Minnesota. Don't. It's hostile. Head to South Dakota, head somewhere else. Minnesota, hostile, small regulation. They're destroying family farms, and this is evidence of it. But when Scott Jensen ran for governor, I did a fundraiser for him in Bemidji. I worked my butt off for about a month and a half. I brought 30 farmers in the room for Scott for an hour meeting before we had the fundraiser. Now, these farmers weren't deer farmers. They were farmers from every walk of life. I had one guy stood up and he said, the DNR has choked out a coulee. It's backed up on my property. I've lost 160 acres of my farmland that I'm not allowed to drain now. So the DNR chokes out the coulee, and all of a sudden I can't clean it, and now what I did farm as productive land is swamp. And I'm mad. Next guy, what's your problem? We had an agreement with the state of Minnesota that we could, as farmers, hay state land when there's a drought. And now they're out there doing controlled burns on this. We don't have any hay for our cows. We can't get a permit to put our cows out on this state land because they'll damage it in some way, shape, or form. But when they started acquiring all the land, we had an agreement. We could put cows out there. We went around the room, 30 farmers. It was nonstop. Another guy, I had to wait 2 years to turn on my well. I irrigate my corn and my wheat. I got to get a permit from the DNR and pay the DNR money for water out of the ground, and I can't turn it on until they tell us to. Scott Jensen's in the room. Jim Schultz is in the room. We're sitting there. And he says, well, how did you ever get your water turned on? I called him up and said, I'm going out there with a gun. I'm turning on my pump. It's been 2 years. Don't come out there. And Scott says, well, what happened? The guy said, I turned on my well. Nobody showed up. 3 weeks later, 2 years and 3 weeks later, my permit showed up in the mail. So we've got a DNR agency preventing farmers from getting water. It's just a nonstop assault on agriculture. So here we sit and we say, oh, Steve's deer farm's under attack. Really? It's not just Steve's deer farm. It's every aspect. They just allocated $198,000 to look for neonicotinoids. What in the world is that? It's a seed-coating pesticide for every little seed that goes in the ground to protect it from bugs eating it. The Democrats said we need $200,000 worth of research to see how this is killing off whitetail fawns. And next year when they go back to legislative session and they have $200,000 worth of research that pesticides are bad, guess they're going to outlaw? Pesticides. But they need a big stack of papers and research that says, oh, we did our $200,000 worth of research, pesticides are bad, we got to outlaw them.
Yeah.
And who's under attack? How many farmers farm without using a pesticide?
That's a rarity these days.
It's coming in
but
Minnesota.
that is
you
an
guys.
industry, the organic farmers.
It is,
God
but I'm
bless
just
them.
saying, you can't provide enough food for Americans if we outlaw all pesticides.
It'd be tough, yeah.
It'd be
No doubt
tough.
about
I'm
it.
just saying, agriculture's under attack and people don't see it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Steve, for coming on and making the big drive from northwestern Minnesota.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
All right, we got to talk about